So glad you're with us for the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. And as predicted, Jim Geraghty is back. And if you've already read today's Morning Jolt or you followed Jim on Instagram, you already know where he's been for the past week and a half. But if not, you're going to learn a whole lot about the place where Jim was for the past week and a half, because that's the entire focus of our show today. And Jim, for the past week and a half, was in India, the largest democracy in the world. And I just learned, Jim, the now largest country in the world. They have just eclipsed China. So first of all, welcome home. Glad to have you. Thanks to all of those who subbed for you, but glad you're back. And it sounds like you had a great trip. I can't wait to dig into it.
Greg, it was an amazing trip, although it's really great to be back. By the standards of my travels this year, it's a great country. Nobody shot at me. Actually, no, seriously, a warm welcome. And I should mention up front that it was probably a little bit more than a year ago. Walter Russell Mead, who's a columnist for the Wall Street Journal and the the Ravenel Curry distinguished, no pun intended, Curry, distinguished fellow in strategy and statesmanship over at the Hudson Institute. So my trip was sponsored by the Hudson Institute and the Foundation for India and India Diaspora Studies, which wants to promote better understanding between India and the United States. And about a year and a half ago, Walter Russell Mead says to me, "Hey, would you like to come to India on this trip we're doing?" And I think at that point some conflict on the home front, but I'd love, please keep me in mind. And things worked well for this one. And I went with a couple other Washington Post journalists, Washington Examiner, Wall Street Journal, great traveling companions, and we packed in a lot. Basically, it takes about a day to get there and a day to get back. I'm pretty much on the other side of the world, and we 5 cities in 7 days was basically it. There was a stretch where we were taking one airplane trip per day, and trying to absorb as much as possible, talking to experts, talking to government officials and stuff. So, great trip, and I can't wait to tell everybody all about it.
Five cities in 7 days, man. You need like rock concert tour T-shirts at that point. So
yes.
Maybe those are still coming. Anyway, can't wait to dig into all of that. We're going to be talking about India's attitudes towards China, which is the subject of your Morning Jolt today, and the threat China poses not only to them, but Taiwan and pretty much Asia. And we'll also be taking a closer look at what the Indians think of Trump. And we'll be talking a little bit more about why this specific trip was done at this specific time, because that's an interesting story as well. But in the meantime, let's talk about Noble Gold. And I don't know if you noticed this week, gold eclipsed $4,000 an ounce. And so I just took the liberty to look back and say, well, if you bought gold back in 2000, how would you be doing now? And back then, it was $280 per troy ounce. And even 10 years ago, 2015, it was a little over $1,000 a troy ounce. And now it's over $4,000. So gold will be paying off. But gold is not just something to diversify your portfolio, which it certainly is. It's also a great retirement option. And the good folks at Noble Gold are focused on gold IRAs that let you hold real assets in a tax-deferred or tax-free retirement account. And Noble Gold is the #1 ranked gold IRA company for 4 years in a row, with more than $2.5 billion in precious metal transactions.
Noble Gold strives to live up to its name. They're going to speak to you like a trusted friend, not some finance bro who's trying to fast talk you into something. They're here to serve. They anticipate questions and guide people through complex topics with patience and clarity. They know the markets, they know the metals, they know the strategies, and they explain them in a way that's easy to understand. No gimmicks, just honest, fact-based insights and clear options.
Yeah, and one of the first things I always do when a potential sponsor comes in is I look at how do the customers like them? Is it a good experience? I looked up their reviews, and they're over 4.9 out of 5. People absolutely love the customer service, the availability of the experts walking you through the different options. And so take advantage of this limited time offer. Open a new qualified IRA or cash account with Noble Gold and get a free 10-ounce silver flag bar plus a silver American Eagle proof coin. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com/3ML. That's noblegoldinvestments.com/3ML. All right, Jim, let's start at the very beginning here. We talked a little bit just a moment ago about how this was all arranged through the Hudson Institute, but the timing of this trip was also for a very specific reason as well. It was for the 100th anniversary of an organization that is very politically powerful in India. It even has ties to the current Indian leader. And it's 100 years old, which is kind of impressive since India is not even 80 years old, the modern state of India. So tell us how this all came together and how it all worked.
Sure. Greg, I noticed you left the pronunciation to me, which is an entirely rational choice.
I can't say it. I tried.
Right. It is the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, or the RSS for short, which is what we referred to it in 99.9% of my discussion of it on the trip and since I've come back. It's very tough to give a good sense of what this is. So the short version, it's a 100th anniversary. Effectively, it's a social organization, and it's kind of an umbrella organization with a lot of different subgroups that handle a lot of different things. They are indisputably Hindu nationalists, and they're designed to instill a sense of pride, a sense of service to the country. It is male only, but there is a organization for women that is separate. It is also very much a big part of the ruling party of over there in India. Narendra Modi joined the current prime minister of India, joined the organization at age 8. And then, has been a strong supporter ever since then. It is very traditionalist in its values. As I said, fervently nationalist, and it wants to, as one of my traveling companions put it, if you think of like Christian nationalism, people think, oh my God, these people want to turn America into a Christian state. A better way of thinking about the RSS in India is that they already have lots of Hindus. What it really wants to do is create within the Hindus a sense of national identity, a sense of national purpose, and a sense of we're all in this together. I would not say, people have used the term "make India great again." That there is an element of that. Like, try to imagine an organization to have an equivalent here in the United States. You'd have to have the Republican Party, probably the Christian Coalition, probably MAGA, probably a bit of the late Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA. Also a whole bunch of the trade unions, also the Boy Scouts, and maybe our old friend Curtis Leawood, the Guardian Angels. There's a little bit of, argument of vigilantism as a part of this. It is an extremely broad-based group, probably 5 to 6 million members. But the other thing is, like, it's not just, in a country of like 1.6 billion people, it's like, oh, it's only 5 million people. But it's really the connected 5 million people. And so their organization clearly has its critics. They're marking 100 years. As you can tell, they've been around for quite a while. Definitely feeling their oats, feeling the on the upswing in its influence on Indian society. And so we fly one of the longest plane flights I've ever taken, Mumbai to Nagpur, which is in the heart of India, kind of where the headquarters is and where the movement started. First morning we're there, they take us to a parade ground. And the standard uniform of someone in the RSS is a black cap, like the little tent type ones you usually find in the military, short sleeve white shirt and brown pants. And Greg, they only did a march, they demonstrated martial arts, they demonstrated yoga, and then they gave speeches. And to give you a sense of, so it was myself, as I mentioned, the other journalists, various officials from other countries who are friendly and warm towards the RSS, everywhere from Indonesia to South Africa. And at one point, as these thousands of guys in front of me, and they've done all this march and they've done all these demonstrations, they are our distinguished guests, Jim Geraghty of National Review and Washington Post. So I get to go up and do my Queen Elizabeth wave. And it was, and then afterwards, like dozens upon dozens of Indian men were taking selfies with me. It was a really strange experience. They were very, very happy and flattered that American journalists had come all this way to watch them. And it's interesting. My next big Washington Post column is going to be trying to get my mental arms around this organization. I could see things. I imagine if you are in this organization, you probably feel terrific about it because it, reaches out particularly to young Muslim men and says, you have a greatness in you. You have a great purpose. You are meant to help make your country an even better place to live. And we're going to help you do it. And they march around, they do exercises, they do yoga. I've heard it described as a paramilitary organization, Greg. And I got to tell you, when I think that, I tend to think of guns. And they don't really have a lot of guns. So, but, this is my most American point of view. Oh, you're a paramilitary organization without guns. That's cute. Now, at the RSS headquarters, there was, considerable security, high walls, barbed wire fence, armed guards, stuff like that. But by and large, they're marching around with sticks. But there's definitely, I could see how if you were not in this organization and you were one of India's minority religions, they have about 200 some million Muslims. They have Christians and other groups. I could see the intimidation factor. I could see the sense of this being a ominous one, particularly how closely connected it is to the prime minister and to throughout the political system. So I can see why minority groups might look at this organization with a certain degree of suspicion. Also, man, everybody we spoke to out there was just bursting with pride and was absolutely convinced that they were making India great and that it had given them this great sense of purpose and direction, and involved in organizations like charity hospitals and cancer research institutes and things like that. So there's more to tell, but it was this was a big part of the trip, and it's fascinating. And somebody made the comparison. You want to talk about the most influential political organizations around the world over the last 100 years. Chinese Communist Party you could put in there, Muslim Brotherhood you could put in there, and probably RSS is in the top three. Now, everybody's heard of the first two, but most Americans have heard nothing about the RSS, and I'm going to do what I can to try to illuminate that in future writings.
Yeah, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it because the podcast feed is known as an RSS feed,
Yes,
which is inside.
So
It's a little bit of an adjustment there. Interesting how the religious minorities in the country look at the organization, though, because you and I were talking beforehand about how India is listed as one of the worst 15 persecutors of Christians, and Muslim groups have complained about it as well. And so I don't know if it's directly related to this group or different governments under different rubrics at times. And so it's interesting how this nationalist approach is playing out there a little bit.
I should point out that we got a chance to speak to the head guy who basically he's kept insisting that when he says Hindu, he does not mean Hindu as in religion. He uses Hindu in terms we would describe as Indian. And he says this applies to those of common ancestry of all faiths, including those in Pakistan, including those in Bangladesh. Whether non-Hindus in these countries feel the same way is probably another story. But he's quick to emphasize that we don't have religious differences. We don't have... they very much reject the traditional Indian caste system and things like that. Now, I'm an American journalist, and I'm meeting this guy at his headquarters with the armed guards and they're definitely putting their best foot forward, and they're not going to come out and say, "Oh, we discriminate against other minority faiths" or anything like that. Of course, they want to emphasize that everybody's welcome and we all see everybody as brothers, et cetera, et cetera. So these organization definitely has its critics and says even if it's not directly violently threatening minority faiths, there's definitely a sense of intimidation, a sense of flexing their muscles and having enormous power over Indian society.
Very, very interesting. All right. So much more to get to, including their thoughts on the Chinese, as well as their thoughts on Donald Trump, which we'll get to next. But in the meantime, Jim's health throughout the trip held up very, very well.
Doing great. Look, upper respiratory infections from Asia, there's nothing to worry about, that sort of thing.
But when it comes to your digestion and so much more, your liver plays a critical role, and more than 30% of Americans have a sluggish liver, which is a problem that, if it goes undetected for too long, can lead to a lot of other problems. And Dose is on a mission to educate all of us on why it's so important to maintain your liver health. And so Dose has created an incredible product to help you do just that. Dose for Your Liver was formulated to cleanse your liver of unwanted elements, aid digestion, and maintain your body's filter.
Your liver is the second largest organ in your body, and it's responsible for more than 500 functions inside your body, acting as your body's filter, flushing out those unwanted elements and breaking down what you consume into essential nutrients. The science-backed formula of Dose promotes liver function, aids digestion, eases bloating, and can even boost your energy levels.
Yeah, it also helps to reduce brain fog, give you better sleep, and it tastes good. So support your health with Dose Daily. Save 25% on your first month when you subscribe at dosedaily.co/3ml or enter the code 3ml at checkout. Now, please note the 25% discount applies only to subscription orders and not one-time purchases. So you can also cancel anytime with no hassle. That's dosedaily.co/3ml to get 25% off your first monthly subscription with the code 3ml. All right, Jim, on to the second part of our story here, and that's how the RSS, I guess, and also Indian officials in general feel towards President Trump. It feels like in Trump's first 4 years, there was a really tight relationship with India, or at least much tighter than we've seen this time. There's been a couple of issues that have really gotten headlines as it relates to India in Trump's first few months of the second term. One is, of course, the skirmish, I guess you could call it, potential escalation for more between India and Pakistan earlier this year that was thankfully resolved. I believe Trump considers that one of his 7 or 8 peace accomplishments this year. And then, of course, there's also the 50% tariffs that Trump has levied on India for continuing to buy Russian oil at a time where he's trying to force Putin to end the war against Ukraine. So what did you learn about how they view Trump on those particular issues and anything else?
So it was intriguing. The short version, obviously, this is not a great moment between U.S.-India relations. There's quite a bit of frustration and exasperation on the side of the Indians. And obviously, the Trump administration believes that India has been screwing us over on trade for a while, and also very much wants India to stop buying Russian oil, something that I think is an entirely reasonable request. So to use one of my catchphrases, there's a lot to unpack here. One of my things I was fascinated about going to this country is that we feel like probably since at least 9/11, maybe even earlier, there's been this sense that the U.S. and India are on the verge of some sort of great, they would emphasize the word partnership. The Indian government hates the word alliance and never wants to refer to its relationship with any other country as an alliance. I guess in their mind, that implies some sort of obligation or requirement on their part that they don't want to be subject to. But they use the term partnership or friendship. And pretty much, over the last 2 decades or so, India and, the United States are both democracies. We're both former British colonies. We both speak English, or at least some people would say here in America, we speak pretty good English. And we also are both threatened by China and Islamist terrorist groups. So you look at all that and you'd probably say, okay, these are 2 countries that are almost destined to grow closer together as time goes by. And I got a chance to listen to Walter Russell Mead make a speech at the India Foundation. He basically pointed out the U.S.-India relationship is almost too big and important for any particular political leader or division to really mess things up. And you're remembering it correctly, Greg. You might remember that when Narendra Modi visited the United States in Trump's first term, I believe it wasn't the Houston Astrodome, it was the Houston Football Stadium, and going around and shaking hands with the massive Indian American population there. And in fact, Trump's first state dinner in this term was for the Modi visiting and the India. So you're like, wait, things were going really, really well with this country. Why is there suddenly so much animosity? The interesting thing is, look, Indians do not like the tariffs. There's no 2 ways about that. You look at the Indian gross domestic product, and they're projecting that it'll probably cost them 0.6, 0.7 of a percentage point on their GDP growth, which is not devastating, but that's growth you'd like to have. It's definitely an impediment. But the interesting thing was most of the experts and think tank folks and government officials we spoke to had this attitude of, you're upset about our tariffs on you. We can talk about that. That they almost feel like that there's room for negotiation on that. What really irks them is this perception of not being respected by Trump. And I don't even know if this is necessarily, I suspect this was not intended by Trump. This is just the way Trump speaks and sees the world. But they really resent the idea that Trump had come along and made peace between India and Pakistan. They really don't. They feel that the U.S. is being way too warm and friendly towards the Pakistani government, and they're almost in disbelief that these were the guys who were hosting Bin Laden. These guys always have been duplicitous, and you saw what happened in Afghanistan. In the eyes of India, they feel like they've been more that they've been in their mind they've been loyal and helpful and much more aligned with us, and that Pakistan is a country where you can never trust these guys. So why is the U.S. Attempting to treat this as some sort of neutral outsider? They almost feel a sense of insult, a sense of not being respected. The other interesting irony, as somebody described to me, for Indian voters, and Modi's not up until 2029, so he's got some time until he is up for re-election. But basically, it's not that they don't care about foreign policy. It's just like most places, the economy is usually your first and preeminent issue. Other domestic issues, generally foreign policy is a second-tier issue, except Islamist terrorism, particularly when it comes from Pakistan. So the idea of, Trump saying, "I came along and fixed this," obviously is not going to play very well over there. The other thing is that Indian leaders can never be seen as sucking up to a foreign leader. And that is something that, we've seen when European leaders come to the United States, particularly in the context of Russia and Ukraine. Oh, Mr. President, only you could, do this. The kind of the gushing praise, and people know flattery works with Trump, right? If you go around and you talk about how terrific he is and all that stuff, Trump is much more likely to receive you warmly and positively. The Indian public would not accept that if Modi did that. And it's been interesting because you haven't seen Trump and Modi meet since the tariffs and these other disputes, and the general sense is that Trump would expect to get some more of that flattery, and Modi cannot appear to be weak or supplicating or something like that. You have two alphas here, and Modi cannot be perceived as not the alpha in a meeting with Trump. And it's interesting because, like I said, up until very recently, Trump and Modi seem to have a pretty solid relationship, and definitely based on mutual respect. So there's a widespread sense of frustration. But they are continuing to negotiate on the tariffs. I think eventually they'll get a deal. I don't know whether it's going to come in a month or 6 months or sometime in next year or something. But there's a general sense that by itself will work itself out. India did have, protectionist policies beforehand. So it's not, the interesting is that almost a sense of, okay, you twist our arm, we twist yours, and we can work that stuff out. I think it's the general sense of not seeing the United States as on their side against Pakistan. And they generally feel like they feel like Trump is way too complimentary of Pakistani leaders. I guess that's kind of in the eye of the beholder, but in their minds, this is an unbelievable. Why are you treating these guys with such respect when they are, if not Islamist terrorists themselves, then not doing very much to stop Islamist terrorists who are threatening and targeting the Indians?
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Well, given what you said before about the natural alliance between the two countries, I suspect that things will get better between Trump and Modi over the next 4 years, since neither of them's going anywhere, at least voluntarily. And so there will be chances for more chances to work together. And so hopefully that'll be the case. But yeah, two major issues that have certainly strained things a little bit here. So we'll get to India's thoughts on China in just a moment. But in the meantime, OneSkin. And if you've been spending too much time in the sun or you're just not taking good care of your skin, OneSkin can definitely help. Mrs. Columbus has talked about how OneSkin is very light, absorbs into the skin, not greasy. I'm a fan of their sunscreen, which not only protects you from the UV rays, but also just protects your skin in general. It's a fantastic product. And the OneSkin product line includes favorites like OS1 Body, OS1 Face, and OS1 Eye. And what you need to know is that all of these are backed by rigorous science.
OneSkin's products have more than 10,000 five-star reviews. Now, if you're not a math major, that adds up to more than 50,000 stars. But you have customers who consistently rave about how their skin is smoother, firmer, and healthier looking, with results that get better over time, improving both the appearance and the overall health of their skin.
Yeah, and OneSkin is changing how we age by focusing on skin and scalp health at the cellular level. It's powered by their patented OS1 peptide. Every formula is designed to keep skin healthier, stronger, and more resilient over time. For a limited time, try OneSkin with 15% off using the code 3ML at oneskin.co. That's 15% off at oneskin.co with the code 3ML. Now, after you make your purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them, so please support the 3 Martini Lunch and tell them that we sent you. All right, Jim, on to the final martini now, and that is what you learned about how India views Chinese ambition. It's the subject of Friday's Morning Jolt, and you got to literally sit next to one of the top Indian officials on what China's endgame is. And China's actually pretty direct in some ways about what they're after here. They're also aiming for a massive military presence, which they're gearing up for, Navy and everything else, for another 100th anniversary. It's coming up for them in a couple of years. You mentioned in the Morning Jolt that there was a skirmish along the Chinese-Indian border back during COVID, which most of us weren't paying attention to that. We were paying attention to COVID. But it went beyond that. It wasn't just the Indian-Chinese threat. It's about China's overall ambitions in the region and really in the world. What did you learn?
Yeah, well, I mentioned that last martini that we, the common interests and common threats are one of the things that are kind of pushing the U.S. and India closer together, almost whether or not we want to. And, we had a lot of meetings over there, met with a lot of officials, but I think one of my favorites was this one. We were at the offices of Nitin Gokhale, who had been an Indian television journalist for a long time. And about a couple of years ago, he founded this organization called Strat News Global. It's kind of a news organization, but it's also kind of a defense and national security think tank. They specialize in covering these sorts of issues. A variety of experts there, but probably my favorite was Jayadeva Ranade. who is widely considered to be India's top expert on all things relating to China, particularly the People's Liberation Army. He's worked in a variety of government roles, but the one that jumps out is he's in the Research and Analysis Wing, or RAW, which is basically the Indian CIA. So he's been posted all over around the world and has been studying China his entire life. And he wasn't trying to alarm anyone, but he pointed out that, like, look, Xi Jinping is absolutely in the saddle, and any rumors you may have heard about discontent in the People's Liberation Army or in elite circles in Beijing, he doesn't see any serious threat to Xi Jinping's power. And very much they are on track to build the army that they want to have, and the Navy and the Air Force forces that they want to have. If they want to get into a conflict in the Taiwan Strait in the next couple of years, they will have it. And as you mentioned, it is likely that the 100th anniversary of the People's Liberation Army in 2027, Xi Jinping has said reportedly that's when he wants to be ready to go with the option of an invasion of Taiwan. Now, what Renaud told me is that he'd probably prefer not to have to do that. He understands that probably would be a bloodbath and would, potentially engulf the entire Pacific Rim. But they like to use what they call, unified front tactics, which is basically propaganda, influence buying, influence blackmail. Basically, can you erode Taiwan's ability to fight before the fight begins? So at some point, they simply acquiesce and say, okay, we'll accept status like Hong Kong. As we all remember, there was a really brutal crackdown on dissent in Hong Kong. The other thing which I said, which you alluded to, which is interesting, is that India, there are a lot of countries that are wary of the increasing military power of China. India has actually fought Chinese People's Liberation Army soldiers in recent memory. Now, it's worth noting this border skirmish you mentioned earlier. In order to prevent border skirmish, they have a disputed border. And to prevent the patrols going on each side from getting into an all-out shooting war, the patrols are not allowed to be armed with firearms. That doesn't mean they can't kill each other, though. And then this conflict back in May 2020, reportedly one side encountered another, some fell into a ravine, and they were armed with riot gear, that kind of armor, and clubs with nails through them. This is some Negan from Walking Dead type stuff, and they beat 20 Indian soldiers to death. Reportedly 4 killed on the Chinese side. And to the Indians, this is fresh in their mind. This is, not long ago, let bygones be bygones sort of thing. So they very much see China as a threat to themselves, quite literally. They were, they noticed that there were 8 new technologies shown in that big parade they had in Beijing a little bit earlier this year. 6 of them are deployed on the Western Front against India. So they very much see themselves as having a potential very serious adversary in India. The other thing that kind of just jumps out at this is, this came up in several of the briefings. So India shares a border with Pakistan. As we noted, Pakistan has, threatened, they've been in conflict with them earlier this year. It shares an even longer border with China, which is disputed, and they had a military conflict with them. They have a roughly 2,500-mile border with Bangladesh, where Islamist groups are getting power under the current interim government. They have a 1,000-mile border with Myanmar, which has been run by a military junta that seized power back in 2021. They have a roughly 1,000-mile border with Nepal, which just forced out its prime minister under So almost every country that borders India has had either Islamists or instability or is hostile. Other than Bhutan, so congratulations Bhutan, where they have 359-mile border. They are the quiet one. Unfortunately, if you're India, you've got all of every time there's instability in a country that is bordering India, refugees end up coming across the border, and as they're not particularly happy about that. There is a belief that all of the instability you see in these regions, some of it is clearly homegrown or a reflection of internal disputes in these countries. But the belief is that China wants to do what it can to fan the flames of disputes in these neighboring countries, because they know the more chaos there is on India's borders, the more the Indian military has to be tied down on those potential conflicts and not deploying power everywhere. On the issue of Taiwan, where I mentioned earlier, India does not recognize Taiwan, but then again, neither do we. India has said that they do not like the way China is militarizing the Taiwanese Strait, and India has an enormous interest in freedom of the seas and freedom of navigation and international trade. So they see a lot to lose in a conflict over Taiwan, between China and Taiwan, and presumably the U.S. or any of these other countries that feel warm and friendly towards it. It's conceivable. Basically, it sounded like from the experts that like India's kind of looking over its options. They really are thinking about, if this comes to pass, what are we willing to do? Do we want, how much do we want to get involved? How much do we want to stay back? But recognizing that they have a considerable amount to lose in this, to say nothing of the fact that if China were to take Taiwan, there's no way that Japan doesn't alter its behavior. There's no way that South Korea doesn't alter its behavior. The entire Pacific Rim would then say, oh, well, I guess we have an ascendant China and a descendant United States, and it's time to start adjusting our policies accordingly. So a lot to lose. So like I said, fascinating trip, but this is the one that I think, this was the meeting or briefing that I thought was most interesting and most clearly relevant to American readership. So that's why it was the first thing I wrote about in the Morning Jolt today.
Yeah, I mean, China's such a huge geopolitical adversary for us. It's very interesting to see how another major country looks at that potential threat. And it's also interesting, we think of trouble in that neighborhood. It's always India and Pakistan, but it's a complicated neighborhood on a number of fronts for a lot of different reasons. And so to learn about that is interesting.
Even the Israelis would look at that and say, wow, they got problems.
Yeah. Don't necessarily love all those neighbors. Now, Jim, I assume you would have mentioned this if it had happened, but I just want to clarify, at any point while you were there, did you end up helping an American archaeologist who was with a showgirl and a young Asian kid who was also very resourceful to help a small village return their religious stones?
Okay, so you know how much I wanted to make Temple of Doom jokes this entire trip. Indians kind of hate that movie because it does not portray the Indians particularly well. It was not filmed in India. It was filmed in Sri Lanka. And I think if you're an Indiana Jones fan, you think of the 3 films that they made, because they only made 3 films.
That's right.
Temple of Doom is the weakest. Last Crusade is a brilliant because of Sean Connery, and Raiders of the Lost Ark is the masterpiece that launched it all. So I held back on that. But yeah, okay. So the 2 last things are, we are in Varanasi, and this is the basically the Vatican of India. And obviously the river Ganges is where basically Shiva and his wife, she lost her. There are people who are much more well-versed in Hindu mythology and religion who can give you a better explanation than I can. But basically, because Shiva's wife lost her earring in the river, it was seen as a holy site. And if you die in the river, you are no longer trapped in the cycle of reincarnation, and your soul is at peace. And so for Hindus, putting the ashes of your loved one in the Ganges River is the most, important holy thing that you can do. So we visited that, and we saw people burning bodies, and it was just an absolutely amazing experience to be there. But to get to our boat, as you can imagine, it's very crowded, a little bit chaotic, or by American standards, and we had to go from one boat to another to get to the boat that we were going to use to go up and down the Ganges and watch all of these ceremonies. It was probably an entry level of a Lara Croft video game. I had to jump from one boat to another without falling in. And my understanding is the Ganges, as holy as it is, the pollution levels are not what you'd want to encounter, to say nothing of human remains, floating down river stream and all that. I managed to get through it without falling off. So I felt really, really proud of that. The other bizarre experience, as I mentioned, we were basically doing a city a day. We get back to Delhi and we have to catch a flight, and Indian airport security is even more thorough than the United States. TSA looks like a bunch of laid-back guys compared to this. Understandably, they've had terrorism, they've had hijackings. I have no begrudge with it, but these lines were particularly slow. I get through it. My traveling companions from the Post and Examiner and Wall Street Journal are like, they're closing the door to our gate. Now, Greg, you've seen me in person. Listeners, viewers, I'm just going to have to... I know it's going to shock you, but I'm not much of a runner. I try to do what I can. I try to work out. I try to, hit the elliptical. But I am not a sprinter. And I've got my bag. I travel with a CPAP. And I am running through it. And I don't think I knocked over any... Okay, I did not knock over any Indians. I may have bumped into a couple of them to get there. Made it to the gate in time. Apparently, one of my traveling companions had gotten there earlier and was basically not allowing them to close the door. we gotta, and of course then we got on the plane and then we had to sit and wait for like 20 minutes before we take off. So whatever, I don't understand how that worked at all. Got there, but that is something I'm never going to forget. Is my sprint through the airport. As I said, my Hudson Institute and Foundation for India and India Diaspora Studies did a fantastic job organizing this trip. But on any type of trip, you're going to have things that are going to go a little bit wrong, or you need some flexibility. And that sprint is something I'm sure I smelled terrific as soon as I got on that plane.
Well, we should stress, though, that sprinting through the airport to make it to the gate is the only thing that Jim has in common with O.J. Simpson.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's, as far as we know. And there's some sort of Jets joke in there. By the way, I was convinced that because I was on the other side of the world and, completely different time zone, that not being able to watch the Jets, they would win. And they didn't even do that. Yeah. Congratulations. How about them, Cowboys?
Yeah, that was not an impressive performance. As soon as I saw that score, I'm like, oh, Jim's never going back to India. But he might, just not during football season, at least not during the Jets. But anyway, Jim, glad you're home. Look forward to returning to the usual fare on Monday, and I'll talk to you then.
Good to be back, Greg. See you Monday.
Jim Geraghty, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch podcast if you don't already, and tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Geraghty. I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a great weekend and join us on Monday, Columbus Day, for the next 3 Martini Lunch.